Buenas. Marta Moreno Vega. Welcome to Culture, Race, Myth, Art, and Justice, the last of a series looking at the moment now, looking at the moment that is trying to silence our voices. And we are standing up. We are talking to our communities in this moment, in this historic moment, and absolutely saying stand up. Understand the issues that are before us, and in understanding the issues that are before us, we must act upon them. Today's session is when the law is not the law. It comes together through a series of conversations I've had with Isi Matai, one of the moderators, with Esmeralda Simmons, Monifa Bendele, and understanding, right, that the artists are at the forefront of having voice, of imaging, of acting out what is necessary for this moment. Historically, our artists have given voice to movements and make them real. But at this moment, when our civil rights are being challenged, when our voice rights are being challenged, our people are in jeopardy, our artists are in jeopardy. And I wanted to understand what was going on, because it is our responsibility to stand up with our artists, with our cultural institutions, to make sure that we continue speaking truth to power. So that I leave you with the moderators and hope that you join the conversation at the end of the discussion so that we can hear your voices as well. So I introduce you to Esmeralda Simmons, Inisi Matei.
Good evening, folks. Good evening. And I want you to know that my name is Esmeralda Simmons, and I am masked tonight. I'm trying to keep it up the way it's supposed to be. But please understand, we are at a moment in time, and there is no better title for where we are now than Race, Myth, Art, Justice. Now, why do we say that? Because one of the things we have to get to is at this moment, when we see Black Lives Matter movement arising, when we see our people's movement arising, many of us wonder, why is it that we're in this situation, and why is the law not acting on our behalf? Well, I want to invite Isis in this conversation. I want to invite Martha in this conversation, because it is very clear that for the United States, the law is acting exactly the way it is intended to act. Not on our behalf, but on behalf of those people who would uphold Western cultural hegemony, white supremacy, and basically the oppression of our peoples across the race, across races. And the First Amendment is only the First Amendment when some people are speaking. The right to bear arms is only the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment is only the Second Amendment when some people are bearing arms. You try walking down the street with the weapon. So I want to invite Isis and Martha to speak on this as well, because we need the artists, but we need everybody in our community to be on board at this time. And we are standing a week away from the presidential elections, a week away from a vote, an election that's going to decide which direction this country is going to go, and how far is it going to go to the right. So, Isis, please come forward. I can't hear you.
Very good. I'm saying thank you, Esmeralda, for the introduction, and to Dr. Vega and to the Creative Justice Initiative for having this conversation. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel. Everyone who is part of this panel is someone who I admire very much, whose work I trust, whose voice I think is essential to this conversation. And so I'm very pleased to be able to meet together as family to have this talk. When Marta and I Dr. Vega and I were thinking about the conversational component to what is already a project referred to as Culture, Race, Art, Myth, and Justice, that also has a visual arts exhibition component that was shown at the Caribbean Cultural Center, and also a book publication. This was a few years ago that we were talking about what was happening, what we were envisioning coming down the line. And in just the few years that we have been talking about these things, the situation has become exponentially worse. And so we thought it was an essential time to talk about what's happening, and also understanding that part of the conversations that are happening in the media and nationally really have a misunderstanding about what the law is, what the function of the law is, and how we relate to it. And we thought that as the end of the series of conversations that have been had thus far in this series of conversations that have talked about cultural equity, that have talked about coalition building, that have talked about sustainability of our organizations and our cultural institutions, and talked about justice in the funding of those institutions. All of those conversations, I believe, presupposed a series of frameworks that are now very much in question and need to be discussed. So I'm very pleased to be able to have this discussion, and very happy that all of the participants agreed to be here with us. So thank you.
I think it's time that we should also thank our sponsors. Isis, can you handle that?
Sure. These conversations are made possible with the funding of the Ford Foundation, also the Open Society Foundation, and the contributions of the New York Women's Foundation. So we're thankful for that sponsorship.
And as we continue the conversation, we need to know that the occurrences of these days are not by accident. For sure, even if there had not been the racist water crisis in our cities, even if George Floyd had not been murdered, matter of fact, even if Trayvon Martin had not been murdered, there would come a point in time when we would rise up. And at this point in time, when we're also facing the absolute disparities that show the United States and its government for really what it is, and by that I mean the COVID pandemic, which I call the plague of 2020. We now see the disparities in deaths from COVID-19, which is simply a reflection of the poor health care, the poor income disparities, the income disparity, the level of poverty, the level of healthcare availability to our people, and that is now reflected by the fact that they are more susceptible to catching the virus and absolutely more susceptible to dying from it. So we see 23% of those that died are Black or Latina, or Latinx. And we see that as the second wave surges, the cities that are being hit the hardest right now is Newark, New Jersey. Which now has, in some parts of it, 23% of the people are now catching the virus. So I'm saying all that to let you know we are at a particular moment in time. And I'm going to stop talking and ask one of our panelists to step forward. Juan Cartagena.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Esmeralda, I just wanted to add a little something before that. Is that okay?
Sure.
I mean, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about COVID providing us a particular kind of lens to a lot of the inequities that we know structurally have been in our society. And we have a couple of backdrops. We have the COVID, we have the uprising that took place in in a big way this summer, and it's continuing. And we have this election as three kind of points of reference.
And the land grab. And the land grab that happened in
And the
Puerto Rico.
land grab. And, you know, part of what we thought was very startling in what has happened is the full frontal assault of the administration on the voice of the people, both at the ballot box and in the streets. Neither of which is new, both of which have been orchestrated for a very, very long time, but they're coming to a loggerheads. They're coming to a point in this particular moment that has animated people in a way that I think is driven by an existential understanding of where we are in the moment. And so I think that we want to frame this conversation looking at what's happening in the streets with regard to the law enforcement, and what's happening at the ballot box, and where we move forward through this election and thereafter.
And could you help me in introducing my good friend Juan Cartagena?
Sure, absolutely. Let me just, Juan Cartagena is, he is a civil rights attorney, a human rights attorney. He's one of the leading voices in equality and non-discrimination. He is the president and general counsel of Latino Justice. It's a national civil rights public interest law office, and he's a graduate of Dartmouth, and he's just done some of the most groundbreaking work in the area of voter rights and so many other areas. But I think that as we start our conversation, we'll start in the area of voter rights, voter suppression, and all that's been going on in that area with Juan at the moment.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Isis and Esmeralda and Marta, for putting on this conversation. It's definitely timely and definitely needed. Plus, I also love the title of this panel, right? When the law is not the law. It's pretty clear to me in my entire career doing this kind of work that an unjust law is no law at all. And I think we start from that premise that a lot of what's happening in this democracy in 2020, a democracy in crisis, a democracy that's teetering between whether it's going to survive in this particular moment, is because, as Meralda mentioned before, these things are done with a particular aim in mind. And mind you, the aim was created perhaps hundreds of years ago when this Constitution was drafted, but it's serving a purpose. And the purpose is to enhance the power of people who currently have it and have had it because of their color of their skin and their race, and deny it from other people who are joining the country, regardless of how they got here, when they got here, or whether they're still arriving. So I thank you for the opportunity to just share with you a couple of these concepts that I know are, well, you already heard them, I'm sure, and just want to put them on the table for discussion purposes. So the first one, of course, I think is we're at a moment in our history in which we have a major party of this country, the Republican Party, literally espousing as a winning strategy the concept that people who can vote and are eligible to vote don't vote. In other words, reducing the eligible electorate is part of their winning strategy. When Mr. Trump said if everyone can vote, Republicans will never win again, he was just repeating what the Republican Party has been doing for decades. He just said it out loud in his own brazen manner, but he was actually just underscoring what all of us who do this kind of work have been doing for decades, and that is, this is a party that literally wins when less people vote. And to stop people from voting is to do the machinations and shenanigans that they have been doing for decades. My second point for you in terms of where we are in history and the issue of how the democracy is at a point of the crisis that we're in is we have a contender for the national office of President of the United States who has already made it clear that he will not accept the results of the election if he loses, and has already tried to delegitimize whatever the appropriate results or adequate results would be. And by questioning the legitimacy of the election well in advance, he has already poked and put that seed into the mind of the people who follow him religiously and with no doubt. And that is, he's starting to question whether or not the results that in which he had already lost a popular vote 4 years ago and may lose it again, does not actually result in a transfer of power. For that is that will present a constitutional crisis of likes we have never seen in this country. So that's also on the table. The next thing we have in 2020 November is an electoral college that is the vestige of a racist form of democracy in which certain states in the original formulation of the colonies were granted preference in order to keep them in the mix, so to speak, so they can ratify a constitution. And those are the states from the Deep South that relied, of course, on the issue of enslaved Africans providing all their labor. As a result of those issues, we have an electoral college that actually has that vestige of how the country was created, creates ridiculous over-representation for states that have very little population, completely denies the popular majority will to large urban areas of America, and completely undermines the ability of individuals to actually vote collectively for a new leadership. And as a result, the Electoral College is also in play one more time in this election. The next thing that's on the table, of course, is a democracy that is actually still underpinned by a puritanical sense of morality. In other words, those of us who work in this area call it the right to vote, when in reality it's the privilege to vote. And this whole thing about whether it's a privilege or a right is underscored by so many states that actually create a moral compass for who is eligible to vote. And that moral compass is also anchored in Jim Crow, also anchored in the racist beliefs of who is eligible to vote and who should vote in this country. And the clearest manifestations of that is felony disfranchisement. The ridiculous notion that in this country you are citizens, but you lose your most quintessential badge of citizenship because you've committed a felony in some time in your past. The notion that so many states condition the right to vote on that particular circumstance in your past, and whereas 2 states in the country still allow people to vote from their prison cells, just like they do in Canada, just like they do in Puerto Rico, just like they do in South Africa, and just like they do in Israel. So this whole notion about reducing citizenship to a morality compass in which one is no longer worthy because they have committed a crime is exactly it's the worst manifestation of what we call in the voting rights literature, vote denial. And so many people are disenfranchised. The Sentencing Project just issued a report that 5.2 million eligible citizens of the United States will not be able to vote in November because of felony disfranchisement rules. And many of those are living back in our communities, paying taxes, they have a job or they're looking for work, and they're still saddled by this disenfranchisement that is created, again, by this moral compass that so many states abide by. The next area of another telltale sign of that we're in a crisis is this whole ridiculous notion of misinformation that occurs in the way the propaganda is actually issued for the eligible voters. The voters that have already made up their mind, they're going to vote no matter what. But the voters in the middle who have yet to literally make up their mind about the current candidates are still subject to the information and misinformation. And the fact that it's been documented in various parts that misinformation is actually coming from foreign entities from my perspective, is neither here nor there. The misinformation could be generated right here in the United States, because Lord knows we have enough groups that will sow disinformation just to keep the power within the current administration. But the fact of the matter is that misinformation wreaks havoc on us. Those of us who've worked in this area for many years, who've done voter registration at the street level, we all know what misinformation means. We've run into so many people who thought they couldn't vote because they had a felony background, a a felony conviction in their background. And then in certain states like New York, you are automatically entitled to register once you finish your parole and your probation sentences. That information doesn't accurately get to our gente. And that's been a part and parcel of these issues. But this misinformation crusade that is currently in the country is one that wreaks havoc on individuals who no longer rely on regular mediums of communication for the news, but rely on social media and whatever that means in terms of deciding. And my last general point is the Supreme Court of the United States. Wow. The Supreme Court of the United States, the very same Supreme Court who decided that George Bush won the election and stopped the recount in Florida because they didn't like the way it was going, claiming that disparate criteria, disparate policies in the state made for confusion and violated the Constitution. So we're just going to stop the entire recount, and gave the election to Bush. This is now the same Supreme Court that's going to decide potentially other challenges at the state level in various of the battleground states, the so-called battleground states, made battleground states only because of the Electoral College, not because of the people who actually live there. And as a result of these things, we are looking at a Supreme Court that already has a dubious reputation for intervening in these national contests. And it raises one more time this lack of a national standard for how we tabulate our votes. Lack of a national standard for how we tabulate votes in a national election, which basically means we've stuck to the local laws, policies, and election codes of 50 states. We're going to be watching TV for days, trying to understand the law of Pennsylvania or the law of North Carolina, or the laws of Florida, or the laws of Ohio, whatever the state that's at issue. Listening to election experts at the local level tell us what it means when a document is not signed, or is signed by a signature that doesn't match with the signature of the person who registered to vote 40 years before. What does that mean? What it actually means is that we're back again to this ridiculous notion of state sovereignty and the same basis of the Electoral College, which discriminates against us because it purports to respect states' rights. States' rights, we all know, is code. Code for allowing states to continue their legitimate, lawful systems of suppressing the vote and lawful systems of oppressing people of color in this country. That's what states' rights means to all of us on this panel. And yet we're going to be hearing about states' rights and how a state can decide who is eligible or not eligible. And that's what's at stake in this democracy. And that's what's at stake in November. So I'll end with this. We put a lot of faith in democratic institutions in this country. This country has gone to war and imposed democratic institutions on other countries. Yet it has one of the worst functioning democracies in the world. But although we put a lot of faith in the vote, which is going to happen next week, change does not just get deposited in the vote. Change comes from other forms of pressure. It is not going to be decided necessarily by what happens next week. And whoever wins next week doesn't mean we don't stop. We have to continue to make sure that we have the rights of our people in mind, and we have the long-term survivability of our resilience is still at play, regardless of who wins and regardless of the vote. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. So, one, it seems as though, all this, the patchwork of laws and regulations, state by state, county by county, serves its purpose, as does the Electoral College, as does the gerrymandering, as does the waits at to vote for 10, 8, 12 hours to vote, as does the felon disenfranchisement. All of this plays its role, and the strategy thus far for the people seems to be you have to vote but you can't just win. You have to win in overwhelming numbers and overwhelming amounts, right? So that's where we're all right now with the early voting and the absentee voting and the waiting in the lines, because the strategy now is overwhelm the vote so that we get an outcome. But even still, you mentioned there's still another safeguard, which is the courts at this point. And the president has made it abundantly clear that he intends to utilize the courts to get the result that he wants, irregardless of our votes, right? So I guess my question is, what should be the strategy moving forward? Because I don't believe that democracy should depend upon the overwhelming of oppressive systems, that somehow systems have to change, and what specifically needs to change, and where is it that we can focus our energies so that every 4 years or every 2 years, we're not confronted with the one strategy of just everybody by hook or by crook get to the polls and see if that works for you.
At the long term, the truth is that we have to get rid of the structures like the Electoral College. We have to get rid of all impediments to actually allow for access to the vote for people who are here. We have to start thinking about what is voice and agency in a real democracy. Like, for example, why does citizenship reign so big for a country that has so many non-citizens and immigrant populations? What exactly is that about? Why don't they have agency or voice? We have to start thinking about denying these structures and changing these structures that will take years to do, but don't stop just because this current president may lose. And that's my biggest concern, that even if he loses, the country's going to have this big sigh of relief, complacency, as if everything is fine. It is not fine. It requires major changes of the structures that impede our agency and our voice. Next, if he loses, if the current occupant of the White House loses but refuses to leave, then that plays into a whole different kind of strategy. That's us taking to the streets to make sure he gets out. And that's us making sure that this change happens immediately in the short term. But I look at these things both in short-term clocks and long-term. In the long term, we still got our work cut out for us, and we cannot be complacent no matter who wins next week.
Thank you.
I would like to thank Juan and Latino Justice for the magnificent work you're doing in Florida, in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut. I can't even name all the places that I don't know how you do it, because I know you only got 3 people, okay? I'm not kidding about that.
You work like crazy.
They're very busy folks, and they're very busy being on the streets, letting the community know what's going on. Yes, talking to immigrants and talking to citizens, making sure people know what they can do, and challenging authorities when in fact they are disenfranchising citizens, Latino citizens. So it's magnificent work, and I'm just proud to be able to work with you on voting rights issues. So the last thing I want you to know is that I am very happy that I sent in a mail ballot, but it took 3 times in New York City for them to get the mail ballots right, and it was still wrong. They had the wrong label on them. So, and if that doesn't discourage people, I don't know what. People were calling me from lines. Seniors were calling me to find out if there's another way, or did they really have to stand on a line for 3 hours to vote during the early voting? Right. So we can only imagine what's going to happen November 3rd. So this is a historic election, no matter how you look at it. And it really is going to be a real display of the falsity, the myth of democracy in this country.
Correct.
All right. So at this point, I'd like to move the conversation on and introduce our next panelist. Her name is Monifa Bandele. She's the Senior Vice President of MomsRising.org, a grassroots organization of more than 1 million people working to achieve economic security for moms, women, and families in the United States. She's on the leadership team of the policy table at the Movement for Black Lives. Additionally, she's on the steering committee of the New York Communities United for Police Reform, representing the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, which is a member organization of the Movement for Black Lives. And in just the past decade, she's led the launch for 2 historic and successful legal cases against misconduct and worked to pass landmark legislation on police reform in both New York City and New York State. Welcome, Monifa. So great to have you here. And I was wondering if you might talk to us a little bit. Juan ended his talk talking about going into the streets, but people in this summer, specifically since the death of George Floyd, have consistently been in the streets and stayed in the streets. And can you talk about a little bit about what you saw happening this summer, where it fits in this longer movement for Black lives, both as the BLM movement and what has come since and what came before? But can you kind of contextualize for us what you think the moment meant this summer and what it will continue to mean?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everybody that has tuned in. This is so great to have a family discussion. Everyone on the panel is someone who I deeply admire and learn so much from. This summer, 25 million people took to the streets during this uprising. There were uprisings in every state in the country, all 50 states. And what we saw was really a culmination of movement building that not only comes out of the past 7 years of building the movement for Black lives, which grew out of the Ferguson uprising, but really decades and decades of work that those member organizations that make up the movement for Black lives have been doing for many of them since they started. So you have new organizations that either started this year, you have organizations that emerged out of Ferguson, and you have organizations that have been working on police reform for multiple decades. And being able to build that infrastructure, being able to really institution build and have 150 Black-led organizations function as one was how we were able to not only take to the streets this summer, but also have sustained uprising over the course of many, 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 many weeks. And typically what people think of when they see the activism of the summer is the action in the streets, is the movement in the streets. But there are so many parallel tracks to this movement, and a lot of it is unseen. And so a very important track is that while we're fighting in the streets, we're also fighting in the courts. So we have a whole lot of legal organizations and legal leaders, like pretty much everybody on this panel, including my comrade coming up next, right? So we have lawyers who are fighting in the courts day in and day out. We have policy leaders, and we have an actual policy table in the movement for Black lives, where hundreds of folks come together, and they're in their local city halls, in the state houses, and on the federal level, pushing policies that reflect the vision for Black lives that came out after the Ferguson uprising, which was basically that we want to divest from policing and incarceration and invest in safety and health and equity. And, and we're also fighting, we're fighting to our executives, right? We're taking them to task. So we're fighting the legislators, we're fighting the executives, we're in the courts, we're in the streets, and being able to tie all that movement together is how you get the movement for Black lives. And so, I think people, we always kind of get a little pissed off, really, when people say, it's time to stop marching and start doing policy work, or it's time to start marching and you need to start voting. These are organizations that have been working on civic engagement and civic participation, many of them for decades. And so what are we seeing in this moment? I know a lot of folks were probably shocked and triggered last night to see a person being confirmed to the highest court in the country who has never tried a case in court, right? Being able to see a process push through that's basically going to configure the court in a way that it will be kind of like this very seemingly generational permanent roadblock to all of the things that we want to advance. We know that that was put in place, and that the energy and the impetus behind that was because we're winning. It's because our movement is building so strong. It's because we're getting so powerful. It's because 25 million people were in the streets that the opposition to our movement is throwing everything in the road to stop us from getting our freedom. And so it deeply fits under the title of this panel. I mean, when I see the law is not the law, I think about how the law is not about justice, right? And that the law in the context of America is not about justice, but about maintaining power, right? And so we are seeing a power struggle on every level of society. And it's because we, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, aren't just growing in numbers. You know, that's been a lot of the conversation as to why Trump won in 2016, because people were fearing the demographic shift. So there's a demographic shift, but there's a power shift that we have been building and we have been fighting for, like I said, for decades. What was the call this summer? For many people, this was the first time they had ever heard the term defund the police, but it's actually not new to activists and to people who have been looking at how do we get the state, police, and vigilantes to stop killing Black people, right? And so a lot of folks like me, you know, we started off saying there's got to be some policy levers. You know, maybe we need a special prosecutor. You know, perhaps we should make sure that there's independent oversight over police. Perhaps we should ban and make illegal certain police practices that result in the deaths of Black people. And what we learned, I know for the Malcolm X grassroots movement over the past 2 decades, you know, ever since People's Justice 2000, which Juan was one of the leaders in that, was that incremental reforms on police departments, on policing in general, does not stop the death of our folks at the hands of the police. That we need a radical transformation of how we think about public safety, what those systems are, who's involved in those systems, and who those systems are accountable to. So when we say defund the police, we're saying that when you look at a city budget, like in New York, where the NYPD's budget for 1 year is in excess of $6 billion with a B dollars. And then you add up all of the things that we know keep our community safe: mental health infrastructure, youth programs, services for people who are without homes, you know, the list goes on. And you add those up and they still don't come up to half of what is spent on a militarized police force. Then we understand that it's not about safety. And it goes back to what I said initially, which is that the law is about maintaining power. And so our movement is disrupting that notion. We're pushing forth an agenda that is about, yes, power. We want power too. We're not afraid to say that we want power for Black folks. We want power for Indigenous people and people of color in this country. And also, we will design what that power looks like. And this conference has really been deeply rooted and grounded in what the role of the cultural worker has been in this movement. And it has been similar to what it's been in the movement of our parents. You know, my father was a Black Panther. They were deeply influenced by the Black arts movement. The artists are the griots. They are telling the story. They are pushing the narrative along and really creating a counter narrative to the dominant media that is saying that protesting is criminal, that, you know, are lying, that what the movement for Black Lives and various Black Lives Matter chapters are doing around the country, and really using their platforms to bring forth truth and to have a communication amongst our movements. One of the most powerful things that people saw this summer were the creation of these murals everywhere that said Black Lives Matter. And I know for many, you know, it felt like this was kind of like empty, that it was performative, right? But I really disagree. Yes, when local politicians were putting them in place, they were performative. But when movement folks and the artists that are part of our movements basically claim space, right? Identify boundaries, cultural boundaries that articulate what our politics are in the moment. That advances us, that pushes it forward. Our children see that, our elders see that when they walk past. They know that this is a moment when they say defund the police, when they see Black Lives Matter, that we are making a huge shift in our relationship to this country right now. So, I want to definitely thank all of the artists globally that are participating in the movement for Black Lives or the Black Lives Matter movement in any way, shape, or form, because that's the evidence. That's our archives. That's what we'll look back on. Big shout out to Emory Douglas, because part of the reason why the Black Panther movement, both the politics, the platforms, and really the activism that they were doing in the streets, that was mutual aid, was so well articulated and shared and grew at such a fast rate, is because of the incorporation of the artists and the strength and the power of the cultural workers in that. So I just want to end my part by saying that we have a lot to disrupt. We still believe a lot of what we hear and see coming out of the mainstream media. Just I guess it was 3 days ago now, it was confirmed that the folks that actually shot up and burned down the Minneapolis precinct were white militias, right? Like white militia members went, shot at the precinct, threw flammable objects at it to burn it down, yelling "Justice for George Floyd," basically disguising themselves as Antifa, which that's a whole nother conversation. And we must continue, and we must create these platforms where we tell our own story about what we're doing in the streets, what our tactics are, how people can join on, because they will continue to try to paint a picture of who we are. And our self-determination teaches us that we have to define ourselves for ourselves. Yeah, and so this is it. This is a moment. I like to end on a happy note. I don't know if people know, but as of this afternoon, 50% of the amount of people who voted in 2016, we have surpassed that number. So more than 60 million people have already early voted. And a lot of that has to do with the movements that the folks on this panel are attached to. We've been working our asses off, right? To disrupt the voter intimidation and suppression that Latino Justice is working on day in and day out, to be in the streets, to make sure people are not intimidated to vote, to spread information, all the public education campaigns, and it's working and we're winning. And I cannot underscore that enough, that everything we see happening against us right now is because we are winning.
Yeah, we are winning. Thank you. That's right. Thank you. Monifa, you bring words of joy. I mean, it's a sweet thing when people who have been in the movement for most of their lives hear a younger person say we are winning. And that person has already been in the movement most of her life. So thank you. There's nothing else to say but thank you. And I'm going to ask all the panelists to do what Monifa just did. Do it. Juan did. Keep telling us about what we can be doing now. Yeah, that's right. It's not over on the 3rd. The revolution doesn't end with the election, okay? It's not over. We have to keep moving. We have to keep pushing. And please tell all of the people that have joined us what type of actions they can be doing. What can they be doing so they can do their part? And I would love to hear some shout outs for some of the artists that have been doing so much during this period of time during the movement. And yeah, thank you for highlighting about the fact that a white militia burned down the precinct. And of course they wanted to put that on us. Well, that sounds like slave times, man. So next up, Ethan.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce our final panelist. She is Derica Purnell. Derica is a human rights attorney, a writer, an organizer, She's worked to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, training to community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. She's a Skadden Fellow. She's done so many amazing things. She helped to build the Justice Project at the Advancement Project in the National Office. I'm not quite sure if that makes sense. I'm sorry. But her advocacy efforts led to the dismissal of 3,000 cases based on unconstitutional policing practices. She's a writer. Her work can be seen in The Guardian. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Slate, the Huffington Post, and she is also the, I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher this, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I lost my notes, but I want to get this right, Derica. The deputy director of something, tell me what it is, at the Union Theological Seminary.
Oh, yes, it's okay. I actually just left that.
Okay.
I was like, no, I hope it's not that thing because we don't even have to worry about that anymore. But I wasn't sure.
Okay. All right, no worries. So, Derica, I just really, really excited that you're here. I've been following your writings, your media presentations, your podcasts. All these things have really just been extremely inspirational to me, and really helped me to refine and sharpen my own lens in the way in which I see these things. And so I was wondering if you might talk about how you came to the abolitionist framework, what it is, and why you think that it is the preferable alternative to a reformist framework.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am extremely nervous. It's not even funny. I'm like,
please don't be. Oh my goodness.
No,
Derica, we love you.
It's so funny. I was like, wait, that one and things I wrote in college. And so I am just completely honored to be here. And Monifa, you already know, I think the world of you. So the idea of following anything you just said, it's like, I think we're done. We can move on to Q&A, but I'll try. But thank you for the invitation. I think I want to start actually by saying a quick description of my house, and then reading something that I wrote, and then I'll get to your question. Is that okay? So my house has all these images of women musicians. So in my bedroom, I have Janet Jackson. In the hallway, at least in my bedroom, I have Tina Turner, like this beautiful poster of her spreading her gown and looks like wings. But in my kitchen, I have Nina Simone. And I was introduced to Nina Simone when I was in college in my Black Studies program. And I just fell in love with her music because I had never heard anyone sound quite like her. And so her voice captured me. But then the thing that captured me even more than her voice was what she would sing about, like the lyrics of her songs. And it felt so timely, like in that particular moment. I think it was Esmeralda who said, since Trayvon Martin, and Trayvon Martin was killed when I was in college. And so here I am being introduced to Nina Simone, who's singing and decrying and condemning racial injustice, right? She's singing The King of Love is Dead. She's singing Mississippi Goddamn. She's singing, all of these songs at a moment where it felt like there were these uprisings in response to this racist vigilante violence. So I want to sing, not sing, oh, Jesus, you do not want to hear me sing. But I do want to read a little bit of this section from her song, Mississippi Goddamn. But that's just the trouble. Do it slow. Desegregation. Do it slow. Mass participation.
Do it slow.
Reunification.
Do it slow.
Do things gradually.
Do it slow.
But bring more tragedy.
Do it slow.
So this song came out in 1964. 1964. So this is a year before my mother was born. that Nina Simone is criticizing the gradualism, the incrementalism of reform, right? Of integration. She's saying, you're telling us to either do it slow or it's going to happen over time. And if you just be quiet enough, if you just shrink yourself enough, then over time, I guarantee you there will be less racial violence. And we know that history. We've seen that history, right? We've seen people in their Sunday's best, be quiet and make appeals to the hearts and minds of the people who are turning into television to watch them get sprayed with water hoses, right? We know this history of doing it slow. And so that song has stuck with me through so many tragedies, so many unfortunate tragedies, right? After Trayvon Martin was killed, Jordan Davis was killed later that year by Michael Dunn over loud music. After Jordan Davis was killed, Michael Brown was killed in 2014 and, in St. Louis. And then the names just continue to add and add and add. And that's not even considering all the people who were, murdered and killed beforehand. And so at each time, the same set of ideas come on the table, that in order to be taken seriously, you can't demand the most radical things. In order to be taken seriously, you must do it slow. In order to be considered seriously, to say we don't want to be the victims of oppression, we hear what Monifa just described. Well, you just need to reform and you need to set up these task forces and we need to have more conversations and more dialogues. And so I ultimately was pushed to the politics of abolition through being one of those, students a long time ago who was calling for justice every time there was an injustice that happened, right? I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 4 or 5 years old because my mama only gave me 2 choices. She said, you can be a doctor or a lawyer because you got to buy me a house. So I knew really early what trajectory I was going to be on, right? And I have been calling these cries for convictions, these calls for arrest. I have been calling them justice, right? So justice becomes this arbitrary, subjective category that you need in the moment to get a win. I remember watching the Dream Defenders sit down and surround Sanford Police Department and just being like, wow, they're doing this to get one person arrested who killed a Black boy who was trying to walk back home and watch the playoffs. And so being a part of that generation of people who have been calling and demanding justice each time these national tragedies would happen, it was just remarkable that in 2020, those same groups who were calling for arrests and calling for convictions are now calling for abolition, right? Are now calling to defund the police, are now calling for much deeper transformational change because we have called into question the criminal legal system's capacity to even issue something that's called justice, right? And so I just feel really grateful to be alive in this moment right now because police violence, prison violence, the carceral state, none of these systems are new. Right. And it took people, fighting, demanding, actually burning things down. I'm not going to hate on people who actually burn things down. I think burning things down is really, really important. I hope we don't get caught. But I think it's really important that we come from a tradition, a Black radical tradition, where people have tried everything to get free, everything. And I think what's so encouraging right now is that people, particularly people who are learning about defund the police, they've exhausted other means of trying to get free. They've exhausted that, right? And I just see my journey as similar for a lot of other people who are calling into question the general society, right? One thing I have been noticing in the conversation around mass incarceration, police reform, there has been cachet around describing these systems as racist, as white supremacists. And I hope that we continue to push our language because capitalism is also one of the major systems of oppression that we have to dismantle in this country. It's not simply that we can, that we can, make our prisons more diverse. Like our goal is to have proportionate representation in prisons. Our goal is to not have proportionate representation in police killings. While disproportionate disproportionality is a metric to get us into the conversation, right? It reveals disparities, help us to reveal injustice. They also conceal and obscure how violent our system is. So I don't want Black people to be killed at the same rate as white people. I don't want anyone to be killed regardless of their race, right? I don't want these systems to exist. You know, I don't want the same interest rates on my loans as white people. I want free university. I want free college. You know, I don't want simply to have diverse officers, you know, pulling out their gun or their nightsticks or their tasers on Black people. Like, I don't want there to be, you know, police officers who are managing the inequality that's as a result of capitalism. And so it just, you know, Grace Lee and James Boggs, their writing, they push us to have explicit calls for socialism. They push us to have explicit calls for anti-capitalism, because so much of the violence that we are trying to combat is rooted in the level of exploitation that we see in the workplace, that we see in our homes, that we see in our communities. It's not reducible to capitalism, but capitalism certainly does not help. It does not help. And so the more that I've been learning about other systems of oppression and how our movement has been demanding intersectionality, it's like these systems are intersecting too, right? This is what Cedric Robinson describes in Black Marxism, that the ways that, you know, systems of oppression they form to create larger systems of oppression that then we go and use police or the military to go and solve. Let me give an example. So right now, the United States, there are about 18,000 law enforcement agencies, about 1 million police officers. They kill about 1,000 people every year. They hurt, assault, sexually assault. Numbers way beyond that. What's also true is that the United States has the most pervasive military presence in the entire world. We have about 800 military bases, 800, right? And the United States also has among the highest, if not the highest, homicide rate of any country with its level of, you know, resources, wealth. And so we have more military, more police, and the same amount of people are killing each other, right? More than all these other countries. We also have, you know, record numbers of people who don't have insurance. We don't have free education. They're like the systems of white supremacy, racism, and capitalism, what, you know, MLK calls the triple evils of our society. They replicate, they permeate others like oppressions within our society. And so an abolitionist framework, an abolitionist analysis goes much further than a reform analysis, because we're not trying to like fix and tinker with, you know, capitalism to make sure that more Black and brown faces are at the top, or more people who are indigenous are at the top, right? And that's what reform does. It tries to force all the people who are suffering into these pockets of oppression. So what abolition does, it puts us into conversations that gives us language to critique colonialism, right? It gives us language to critique white supremacy and capitalism and homophobia and ableism. And the last thing I'll say is this, because I think there was someone calling from Puerto Rico earlier.
Yes.
Yes. So I didn't understand Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States until I went to Martinique. Okay. And the hope that I had in Martinique explained to me how Martinique was a department of France. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's a department? And as she's describing what a department is, I said, oh, wow, that's a colony. That is a colony. This department language just like threw me off completely. And the next year was my first time going to Puerto Rico. And I met with different groups of activists there. And one of the activists I'll never forget, he said, you know, there are a lot of people in the United States who think they're showing solidarity with us by saying that we want to be a state. But there are many people who are here who are fighting to be free, who are fighting for our independence. And I was there on assignment learning about the Puerto Rico's police department. And I was just like, wow, I have been one of those people calling for like demanding, statehood, not realizing the colonial relationship between the US and the island. And so the last thing I would say is that it's not enough to be a good person, right? It's not enough to want to fix the problem. It's not enough to want to do the right thing, as I did when I was in law school, when I organized in college, even when I was in Puerto Rico. What's additionally equally important is that we develop a political analysis, a radical political analysis to inform how we enter and do this work. And I just feel privileged that I'm able to do that with lots of people who are struggling today. So thank you.
Thank you, Derica.
Thank
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Derica, I would like you to explain very, very basically your theory and regarding the abolitionist movement. Just, in a few sentences. You know how that it's very simple, right?
Yeah, super simple, very easy. So I'll use police abolition. When I say police abolition, I mean that we must be working to reduce the size and scope of police, to reduce the reasons why people need police, and to reduce the reasons why they think they need police. So it's a multi-part process that requires political education, organizing, and meeting the needs of people who are facing harm. And that's towards a project of ultimately eliminating police.
Okay, folks, get on the abolition movement. Get on the abolition train. I mean, I have to tell you that people have asked me about it. And I said, well, anything that has the word abolition in it sounds good to me. But what people do not understand is that the abolition, that's why I wanted you to say it. Abolition movement is really about recreating society, eliminating aspects of the society, eliminating maybe the society itself, and recreating, building anew. Abolish this, create something that works for people. So it is the most hopeful thing you could think about, because certainly, and I'll be personal about it, I really was very moved to regarding the criminal justice system when I went to law school. But before I even left law school, I said I can't work in that. I can't do that. The whole system is corrupt. I can't be part of it. I also couldn't be part of the New York City Board of Education. Okay, so it's like you're facing these systems, the child welfare system, the adoption system, all of these systems that are not working. And we could go on and on and on. The healthcare system, the mental health care. If you can name one that is working, that's wonderful. But most of the time, what we need is to abolish them and start all over again, because they were not started with the premise of serving the people that need to be served.
Yeah, and I think that
can I say one thing on that? Because I was watching this documentary last night on Frontline that was interviewing Raz Baraka, who's a friend of mine, and he said that all of the systems that Black people come in contact with have the same goal as the police. So he talked about the healthcare system, housing system. He said the only difference is they have guns. And so, we're focused in on that one specifically because that's where we see, the shooting deaths, the strangling. They have that power to take life. But just as many women, Black women, die giving birth in our health and hospital system. So that really struck me. And it reminded me, when you just said that, it reminded me of that quote from this documentary last night.
Let's just, look at the banking system, look at the housing system. Keep looking, folks. And if you see just one that works to benefit the people that need it the most, and even works to benefit for the majority of the people, that would be a major accomplishment in this society. I haven't found one yet. But I will say one thing. I'm talking about governmental systems. But I will say one thing. What I have found, and I'm proud to be on this panel with you folks, is that there are hundreds, if not millions, of people that are dedicated to abolition, that are dedicated to creating something new. And And we are here to talk about that, but we're also here to forward the idea that it takes movement, and movement means people movement, people do it. So I am going to ask all of you to forward your simplest and maybe your most complex ideas about what people who are listening in, what can we do? We got these attorneys here, we got these advocates here. What can an artist do? What can a community member? What can a nurse in a hospital do? What can we do?
I want to say to use your platform. The most powerful thing that I saw this summer happen before Juneteenth. We were having daily demonstrations down by Barclay Center in downtown Brooklyn. And the police have been kettling and arresting so many folks that they needed to commandeer the MTA in order to shuttle protesters from downtown down to Central Booking in Brooklyn. And so, of course, in order to commandeer the buses, you need the bus drivers. And one of the most moving things that I saw that actually brought me to tears was the day when the bus drivers, the MTA workers, refused to be
able of COVID. That's right.
And they did it physically. You know, we saw bus drivers, I start crying when I start to mention it, step off the buses and refuse to drive those buses to take people who are exercising their constitutional right to jail. And they also issued a statement, like this was coordinated. You know, these are transit workers. So they're not in the meetings with Movement for Black Lives First folks. You know, they maybe weren't involved in what some of the coordination was around the demonstration, but they were in alignment and they used their power to support the movement and to say, yes, this is my movement. So they issued a statement and a tweet saying that we are TWU. We are not the NYPD. And we take the working men and women of New York to and from work and not to jail. And it just kind of burst everything open. So it shows that whether you are a teacher, you're a nurse, you know, you work in a store, like we all have a platform that we can stand in the moment. And sometimes it could be the most powerful thing. And then it happened all over the country. The bus drivers in Oakland and the bus drivers in Minneapolis issued like the same statement, you know, and the wind that put against our backs is immeasurable. You know, like they will never know how you feel when you like, the bus drivers are like, hell no, right?
They're already risking their lives every day, folks.
Yeah.
For us.
Yeah, absolutely.
For us. Derica, words of wisdom?
Well, I was just sitting with a story that Monifa shared, which is like, yeah, it's definitely emotional and impactful. It also reminds me of that video of the Amish that I saw that were singing. And I was just like, what? Like, it felt so surreal that everyone just, we're in alignment and fell into place. Words of wisdom. So I tried to offer something towards the end that I think is very important, that people develop a political analysis. And by political analysis, I don't mean to study by yourself. I mean to join an organization and find your people, to do and take on political education, to build a conceptual alignment to help you do this work, right? Which is different than I'm reading so I can like quote this line, or I'm reading because I want to be just a part of this book club. Like, consider reading and studying and struggling alongside people to help shape your understanding and build a paradigm around the work that you can do. So I absolutely echo everything Monifa just said, because like she said, those particular, like that group of people were in alignment. They were, you know, working as a community in order to support the movement. It's also very important that people do that intentionally. And in terms of abolition, there's so many different groups that have sprung up in the last even few months, but in the last few years, that where people are developing criticisms of their, you know, workplace, of their industry, of their profession, of their discipline towards abolitionist aims. There was a doctor at a convening I was just at last week, and she even though she's a part of the American Medical Association, she's also a part of this group. I think it's called like Doctors for Abolition. And so I just think it's amazing how people are coming up and envisioning, okay, what's my relationship to the carceral state, or what's my relationship to this system of oppression? How can I find my people and organize there? So for her, it was, this doctors group. For other people, it may be an environmental justice group that's working through an abolitionist framework like Fight Toxic Prisons. What's another group that I just found out about? There are parent groups that are popping up who's doing work around abolition, who's trying to figure out how to like train their children to not grow up and be a part of the carceral state if they have that option. I was just thinking of another group that's like, it's on the tip of my tongue. So I found out about it. I was so excited about that particular intersection, but it's leaving me. But, I always think about Robin Kelly's Love, Study, Struggle, to think about where people plug in. So how are you taking care of the people that are around you? How are you studying and struggling to build a conceptual alignment? And then how are you struggling? How are you showing up to protest? Like, where is your particular part? I think protests get such a bad rep. I think protest is so important. Like Monifa said in her introductory comments, people are eager to question, okay, from protest to policy, like move on to the next thing, show us what it is you really, really want. But what happens in the streets when people protest is a process of transformation. You see people literally removing, people from ISIS hands, from ISIS grasp, like stopping deportations in real time, de-arresting people from the police, right? I think it's great that we have organizations that go and bail people out and get them out of jail. We also need people to free people from police in real time. And what happens in the streets is what Frantz Fanon talks about. They see the colonizer bleed. They see that they don't have a monopoly on who gets to decide who's powerless in that moment. So I think protests are able to do that for us. I would encourage everyone to figure out how to do that if they have the ability to do that, and then to love, study, and struggle in other ways.
Love, study, and struggle. And Juan, what do you think the steps are? What do you think the steps for the future and the priority should be?
Actually, I want to pick up on Devika's last point, because there is a role for all of us to play in this. And some of us who were not able to go into the streets for whatever reason have a role to play. I think the biggest thing is to maintain that incredible passion and recognition of our people and their resiliency. It's a word that I've been using over and over again to talk about how we have been able to survive this and so many other things, and we're prepared to survive this and whatever comes our way. But I really liked Devika's last point about finding that space in which we can all help, and also finding a space in which we can all have our own healing. This work is super important, but it's also incredibly taxing. And we got to find ways to rejuvenate our spirits and our souls and our minds, and find ways to make sure that we get that energy back to the highest level possible. That's why when I sit in these conversations with you all, this is just amazing. I've written down like 6 things I want to read or look up as soon as I'm finished with you. See, and that's what rejuvenates my soul. But we need more than that. We need time. We need to be in communion with our own people in ways that we can restore our spiritual health, and making sure that we're anchored in what this really means. It's long term. It's all long term. And at the end of this long term struggle, we're winning and winning and winning. Monifa said it best. These systems are working right now, throwing everything at us because we're winning. And this country will be all the better when we get to a point of abolishing all these things, abolishing ICE, stop the criminalization of our presence in this country as if we weren't here, or as if we don't deserve to be here, or if we were brought here by chains as if we didn't make this damn country. I mean, at the end of the day, is how do we find these systems, dismantle those systems, as you said, Esmeralda, and create new ones? But remember that we have to do this in a way that allows us to also rejuvenate. And I just love the ideas about finding those roles. And even if it means that you're only able to provide solace to somebody who just came back from a protest, and clap your hands and put your arms around these organizers, because that nothing is done without our organizers. And many of us on this phone call on this panel are lawyers, but we all know that deep down we're all organizers. And when I first started this career, I was thrown into a whole bunch of stuff, caseload this high, and I just knew that if I didn't know of a way to reach people and talk to people and listen to our people before I assume I know what the answers are. That's right. And listen to them. Then that's what gave me the grounding to say, and the confidence to say, I can do this, and I can do this for the long term. So thank you for this opportunity.
I think that so much was unpacked tonight that it's really incredible. But one thing that, for me, in the context of this conversation, we use the word abolitionism, but many people are doing the work of abolitionism without the title of it, And when I think about, as a lawyer, what excites me is the intersectionality between the law and the cultural organizations and the artists and what is happening. I mean, one thing is we're not just winning we're not just winning in the streets. We've won the culture war, and the fact that they had to push in a reactionary Supreme Court justice in the way that they did shows that we've won the culture war. And so when I think about this conversation in the context of the other panels that were had, and I think about how we opened with the elders and with Amelia Baines and John Quick-to-See and with Margot Machida and the work that these people have been doing in community for decades, and the work is the creating the space for people to exist, literally to exist in their fullness, and that is revolutionary, and that is abolitionist, and that is the radical imagination and creativity and the ability to see what it is that you want to happen and to make it happen. And I think that why maybe we're ending the series of conversations is to somehow think about the ways in which this work has continued for decades, and we're just coming together to talk about a framework in which these things can be seen in relationship to each other. And so I think it's just incredibly exciting, and what excites me is the creativity, the expansiveness, the liberation to be able to not tinker around the edges like Derica said, but to really radically reimagine together something that is better for all of us.
Oh, as Nina said, just give me my equality, because everybody knows. And you can fill in the blank. It's not just Mississippi, goddamn, okay? All right, please, folks, I think it's time for us to hear from you. I'm not too sure about the mechanism that how we're gonna see your questions. But I do want you to know that some folks have been writing already. I do want you to know that we do look forward to hearing from you. So, Isis, are we gonna hear from Olga? How are we gonna hear from?
No, unfortunately, Olga is in Puerto Rico and her internet is down. So we are not, I'm sorry, not Olga. I'm talking about Maricruz. I don't know how Olga. I'm not sure how we're going to hear from her regarding the questions. Okay. So I don't know. I'm not able to see any questions. I don't believe. Let me see.
Okay, I'm pointing that out.
Oh wait, hold on. Yeah. Does anybody have questions? I'm looking now. We're open. Okay.
Okay.
I'm quite sure. I don't see anything in the comments at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. I feel free to.
I'm asking the audience now. Okay.
Okay.
So in the interim. Oh, here they come. Here they come. They're thanking you. Thank you. For your sharing. And you know, I take pride now in saying I'm one of the elders, and how much joy it gives me, as I said before, to see the Derrickas, the Monifa, the ECs, um, the Monifas leading. We need your voice. We need your energy. And I want you to know we need something else. You can see things differently than how my generation saw things. And what you see is clearer than what we saw. We were bogged down, truly bogged down. And some of us thought it was the dawn of a new day after the civil rights era. We came right there, you know, and, you know, things were going to get better. And now we know, thank God, once again, that things will not get better unless we make it. Oh. I think that's a question bubbling up. Can't hear you. Can anybody hear that person?
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, that was Mara Cruz trying to get on again.
Trying to get on. Okay.
Well, it's a shame. Okay. So I want you to know that I have tremendous gratitude for your work, your commitment. But I do hope that you listen to what Juan said, that you, all of you, you have to take care of yourselves. Because I can't tell you how many of colleagues, brothers, and some of you call themselves comrades burnt out, completely burnt out themselves, and sometimes burnt themselves and their families out, doing great work, but at the risk of their own well-being, and cut their lives short doing it that way. So we've learned that that's not the best way to do things. So thank you, folks. Thank you for what you're doing. And tell us again where people can find you, Monifa.
Yeah, sure. Oh, some people are asking about the path forward after Election Day. So I'll just say that definitely go to m4bl.org. That's the website for the Movement for Black Lives. You should sign up to get our text messages, our emails, because in answer to that question that just popped up, there will be a lot of actions to take after the elections. There's going to be a lot of planning and networking that we need to do in order to put forth collective demands, no matter the outcome.
Info.
Sure. M4BL, like Movement for Black Lives. M4BL.org. Folks should go there and sign up to get information. And also, if you have an organization that you'd like to have join, even if it's a cultural organization, people ask that all the time. Yes, you have a Black-led organization that is in defense of Black lives in any way, shape, or form, please join. But one of the things I wanted to say before we jumped off is that our movement is global. I don't know if people have been paying attention to what's happening in Nigeria, what's happening basically in the African diaspora and on the continent. I've been on the phone and on calls with folks, with Nigerian activists. And one of the things, another, tearjerker, is that by the end of those conversations, they uniformly talk about how the movement this summer, right here, in the streets of St. Louis and Minneapolis and Chicago. I was joking with Derricka on text that the Midwest Blacks have taken the lead during this era, has inspired them to do what they had always been told, wasn't possible, wasn't in the culture, or wasn't just like in the makeup of how you do things and how you bring about change. And so you never know what impact you have, not just on the conditions in your city, but because the whole world is watching, literally, what that can mean for change globally. And just like Derricka talked about, the systems that oppress us are intersectional, they interlock. There's also a global network of fascism, and they feed off of being able to be successful where they are locally. And so where you disrupt it on one end, it causes and helps to feed disruptions on the other end. And it weakens that power grab that's happening, that the laws are being used. And so I just wanted to shout out, because I'm sure there's probably people watching who are Nigerian here, have relatives there. It's like, we are one. We realize that policing does not equal safety. And we, like Esmeralda said, can build what safety looks like for ourselves.
Further comments, further questions, further inspirations? Dr. Vega.
Dr. Vega.
Well, I think that it's important for us to think about how we go forward, right? Because as Cece said, we use words, but oftentimes because we've been so colonized, right, in our minds.
Thank you.
We don't even know how to decolonize, right? That process of colonizing and what it means and how we do it. And, of course, we can tell people, read Nguli Tiongo's book, read Frantz Fanon, all of that is important. But how would you, right, the people on the panel, look at what the next steps for decolonization is? Because I'm in a colony, I'm in Puerto Rico, but the U.S. is a colony for us.
Thank you.
Right? We're living in a colony. So how then do we proceed, right? And proceed at those different entry points as a unit? Because I think that how Monifa described the coming together of 150 organizations is critical. How do we bring all those pieces of the puzzle together, right? And how do we disrupt the barriers that we have with each other? Because that's another issue that we have to look at, right? In organizing, that we understand that the numerical numbers that we're representing as African descendants, as Africans, as Latinos, and as Native peoples, as Asian peoples is critical. But we're not all of the same mind.
That's right.
Right? We represent a diverse way of acting, different ways of thinking, and the need to pull together those that are thinking in the same manner, right? Or in similar manners to what you all have presented is key. Right? Because as Juan said, this doesn't end November 3rd.
The world is flat.
Right? Right now, so much has been destroyed that we know and don't know that just the information that we need has to be more accessible. So my question would be, what are the immediate next steps?
I'm going to jump in because I think that some of it was already said by Derica, but I want to repeat that. I myself am engaged in that, even at this point in my life. You're never too old to learn, but we need to be in small groups doing political education to free our minds. Or some people say get woke, get conscious, realize the box that we're in, realize the square cube that we've been placed in, so that they don't have to make us go to the back of the house, and we'll just go there voluntarily. That's an analogy. So I think that there's one of the most significant things that can be done is for people to study with each other and then do work in the community based upon what you're studying. So I'm working with a group of young people, a volunteer organization, and we're going through Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power. And he talks about decolonizing your mind. And we're working on that at the same time as we do volunteer work within the community. So it's not just thinking, it is actually acting.
And I think also that we have to start having, I guess, I'll just say it like this. The reason that we have the Supreme Court the way it is today, and the reason that Donald Trump was able to pack the federal court, both on the appellate level and the Supreme Court level, is because those people had a strategy and a plan. They figured out which levers within the mechanism they could co-opt, they could take, they could mold into what they needed it to be, right? And they figured out that how to leverage those levers of power so that they could affect the outcomes and the lives of us all. And we need to really start thinking about and identifying those things that need to be, I don't want to say reformed because that's not what it is, but reimagined, that could have that same leverage for the liberation and the justice for us. So it's like what Monifa said. This is long-term planning. It's strategic planning. It's identifying those things in the system that are really leveraged to the maximum to oppress and to stifle, and how to undo and reimagine those particular things first, so that we can start to then have the space to start to recreate and reimagine even larger and larger systems for the society that we want to have. But we have to sort of figure out how to unlock some of these things that they're wrapping up. You know, the census is a huge thing. The electoral college is a huge thing, as Juan mentioned. The courts are a huge thing. And so I think it's voting, it's the things that you do in the, you know, as Esmeralda just talked about, it's sustained civil engagement or civic engagement, but it's also really identifying and pinpointing those things that can have the maximum effect.
I think
I
think it's important to find out what I think that there's a level or lack of information, right? That doesn't even allow people to know what to impact, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I was speaking with you, Isis, and then I was speaking with Monifa, and getting different types of information, right, in conversations that we were having, was the genesis of this panel, right? Because when I understood people were being arrested, right, and not even know, if they didn't even know what they were charged with, and didn't even know when they were going to be let out of prison, right? That was a revelation, and I think I'm pretty
unmarked cars. Yeah,
you know, I'm pretty on the news, but I didn't know that until you shared that information, right? Until that information was shared, and this is listening to cable and listening to all the news channels right now. So that, how do we find a way of getting information to people, right, that is critical for the baseline, right? And it goes to the point that Esmeralda made, right? Some people are not going to know what abolition, the new abolition movement is, right? In terms of deconstructing processes. So how do we get to class 101, right? To a broad public.
Well,
I think Derek was to go. Oh, go ahead.
well, I'll jump in there because actually, go ahead, Juan. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just also, really just thinking about some of these themes that we're raising here. You're asking what to do, what the immediate next steps are. The first thing that this year has shown us is that our healthcare system is completely outrageous. Tying healthcare to employment makes no sense. Lack of universal healthcare makes no sense. For this administration to try to cut healthcare, for this administration to get out of the World Health Organization due to the pandemic, is done deliberately because they care less about the safety of working class folk. The second thing is that this economic downturn that's going to has already reached global proportions, means that we need to find ways that we can talk amongst ourselves about pushing back from the notion that what mainstream media is going to say in about 9 months is that, oh, the economy has rebounded because Wall Street has rebounded. And therefore tying what the economy does with just Wall Street and completely disregarding what we're having here in terms of what it means for working class folk and their ability to make ends meet. So understanding what the economic issues are to stop linking economic recovery, no matter what we want to call that, 6, 9 months, 12 months down the line, to Wall Street and shareholder value. And the last thing I want to add is that, yes, we're going to have an issue again with the Electoral College, no matter who wins again, how, in next week. But we just had this episode with the Supreme Court. And you all know the Supreme Court, the way it's designed in this country, is one of the most undemocratic institutions that we have. It's like 9 folk appointed forever making national policy. So what is it about their tenure that we can start to question? Why did they serve so long? What is it about their ability to actually overturn acts of Congress that they can do without with no regard to how those votes were procured? The Voting Rights Act in Section 5 was gutted by a Supreme Court at a point in time when that was passed in 2007. It was passed in such a bipartisan way that it had all the earmarks of what this country thinks should be a fair law in terms of bipartisanship. And yet it was thrown out by the Supreme Court. So we have to start getting ready to teach ourselves, what does it mean to completely reform the Supreme Court? What does it mean to have, if you can imagine a system of representative government where you get rid of gerrymandering, which, by the way, will take us another 18 hours to figure out how to do that. Then what does it mean when a representative form of government can actually create laws? And why do we allow those laws to be thrown out immediately by just a slim majority of the Supreme Court? So what is it about their effective power to undo, quote unquote, whatever the will of the people is supposed to be and how that's measured? So I think among the things we have to learn, Marta, is what is it about these 3 issues? Healthcare, the economic crisis that's going to be set working class folk, and a Supreme Court that we can heavy up and get up to speed to figure out what the solutions are, then advocating and demanding them.
So it sounds like we need a kind of civic course with our perception, with our vision, right? And our goals.
With our vision.
Right? Is that what it sounds like?
I think it also means the things that Juan's talking about, whether they be the Electoral College or reforming the Supreme Court, these are constitutional changes that are going to be made, and the way they're made are with super majorities, right? They just can't be a vote of 51 to 48, right? So we have to really think about who we're sending to the Congress, and who we're sending to the executive branch, and also in what numbers, because what we're talking about are structural changes that are voted on by super majorities in Congress.
And I also want to add that your 101, the impact of the coming coming economic depression is going to be massive for our people.
Well, we already have 1 million people that have slid into poverty.
Sure.
Exactly. Well, guess what? There's going to be another 1 million or more.
Easily.
Because some of these jobs are never coming back. And if they do come back, we will not be the ones in them. And I hope you're looking at what has happened in this country, or some of the jobs that used to be done by our folks are now being done by other people, and there's no job for us. So what I'm asking, and I'm not talking about immigrants, I'm talking about just general, somebody's nephew. So I'm telling you that we need to have these community forums that are enticing because our cultural artists come and do a little performance, and then we have a little discussion about the same issue that the cultural artists are in fact dancing about, speaking about, performing about, and tie it into our history, tie it into our culture. This is what we need to do. This is what the issue is. This is not a new issue. And that way our people can stay abreast about what's happening and not rely upon social media or the mainframe media to tell us what's happening in our community, because they don't cover us.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we have that absolutely as an issue, but in a moment, right, where we are sheltered and are communicating via technology. The reason Marie Cruz is not on right now is because we're in an area where internet is almost non-existent.
Yes,
we're in Afro-Boricua area where internet is almost inaccessible. This is I'm in Loíza, but this is true for our children who are economically disenfranchised.
It's true for
in the United States and wherever our people are. So what does that mean in terms of our children being educated, adults having access to the new form of jobs? Because even that, right? Most of us have the privilege of doing our work from home, right? Even though we have to be home. There are a lot of our people that can't even get on the internet.
Please.
I think there are other ways, though, of learning and developing political analyses that don't rely exclusively on the internet. It's okay to actually take me out of the solo frame because it's hard for me to look at myself and talk. It's much more communal. Yeah, we've had social movements and education. All of that predates the internet. You know, now I don't know if this point even makes sense, but when you ask, you know, what are the steps to decolonization? I don't know if they're immediate next steps, but one thing that I remember from the first decolonial project that I participated in was in the Feast Must Fall movement in South Africa. So these were students who were uprising against the colonial structures of their schools. They said, we don't want institutions named after roads. We don't want the colonizers with the people who maintain apartheid on our buildings, their portraits in our hallways. And they began renaming their structures. They began burning those portraits. They began resisting and starting a decolonial conversation that sparked decolonial conversations all over the world. What was beautiful about the South African student movement is that not only were they just trying to remove the statues or rename the institutions, they also connected that to free education. They also connected that to the workers who were on campus, who were a part of a contractual labor package. And we said, we don't want our parents to be contractual laborers. We want them to be workers, employees of the university so they can get benefits. And so what I am noticing and seeing today is that there are impulses of decolonization even within the settler colony that is the US. We're seeing the statues that are coming down. We're seeing the schools apologize and say, oh, we're so sorry. Woodrow Wilson was a racist. We're going to change the name of the school. But we have to push people to demand more material conditions transformation, right? Not just what happens with names. The part I was going to add to that, the reason I asked if you were in Loíza, because one of the groups I actually look to for abolitionist inspiration is Talis Salud and the organizing that they do in Loíza. And it was in Puerto Rico that, again, I learned about Promesa. And I thought that in the US, that if you were a victim of police violence, it was bad. But in Puerto Rico, not only do you not have, the criminal accountability or criminal culpability for police officers who are killing and assaulting people who are there, you don't even have civil action. Right? You don't have civil action because under Promesa, if you were going to sue for damages, the island doesn't have money. So then you can't get damages for being a victim of police violence. And so making those connections bright for people happens through social movements, because you're able to shift the narrative, and then you have the news who's trying to keep up with the people in the streets. Defund the police didn't become a talking point because of everyone started reasoning, our prison's obsolete. Like, that's not what happened, right? Lots of people went into the streets and started painting it. They started screaming it. When politicians showed up at the marches and said, we're going to do police reform, people in the community answered back, right? And so I think that social movements can really push people to think more deeply about the society that we're building. You're able to develop new general public consensus about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I think that we can rely on that, because internet is obviously important and we need it to communicate. But there are other ways, there are other traditions we can draw from to continue those conversations.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that keeps coming up is this in community thing. And I think that, look in your own backyard, I think, to see who you can connect with, to see what organizations are happening right in your own backyard. It's too bad that Maricruz wasn't here, because she runs and founded an organization called COPI. And COPI grew out of the land rights movement for the indigenous African people who are the inheritors of that land, and an environmental movement, which is critical. Piñones is a flat piece of land right on the ocean, right? And so we're talking about, what happened with Maria and the climate refugees that are now from Puerto Rico here in the United States. In that space of COPI, it became a space for learning dance, and now they have a dance company. And when in the process of organizing these conversations, I've talked to cultural organizations that you think are about art exclusively or culture exclusively, but they're really about the survival of the people in the community. They are theater companies that are also using the money that they make in the theater part to drill wells on the Pueblo reservation for the people who don't have water. It is, arts organizations that are also handing out food. I mean, that our understanding of what these cultural organizations are really lifeblood organizations for the people who live in that community. And so to connect with them, to support them is, yes, we're going to have globalism and we're going to have intersectionality that goes across a lot of different grains, but one place to start is right in your own backyard, connecting with these organizations that are of, by, and for the community and are serving the immediate and the future needs of that community.
I just wanted to add things really quickly too. I agree so much with Derica said. There's so many ways to spread this information and have these conversations. But I do also want to say that there's like an unprecedented amount of written materials, graphic novels. There's just a video was just released on abolition, and that the tools are almost, they're so accessible in ways that, it's just like you can look it up. You can get the email and you can get like all of the stuff that comes out like in real time. You can follow the social media platforms and get all those stuff. If you just did like a Google search of like police abolition, prison abolition, you would see everything that Derica has written. So yes, you don't just have to read, but yes, you can also read. And there's so much out there, look it up, share it with your folks. It's not going to jump through the computer or wherever and knock you in the head. It's really time for us to also really take the initiative and go out and grab this information and have the conversations with our families and friends. And then the second thing I wanted to say was that, what Juan said really hit me, when I was sitting here. I'm just so grateful to have our elders like Marta and Esmeralda, but I started thinking about all of the elders that are not here, and gone too long. And then, a lot of people don't know, but that, Derica and I have comrades who left us this summer that just gone too quickly. Already people who are young people who are middle-aged are just literally working themselves to death. So I was so happy that you named that, Juan, because I think that's a piece that we really can't say enough, is just that like our health is resistance. Like part of what we're fighting for in abolition is like the ability to like not just live, but to thrive. And so part of that, us making space, claiming the space that we need to take care of each other. So I'd say that the next step after this year of like global pandemic, massive uprisings and revolution, unprecedented election to stomp out fascism, that people should really take some time to heal and take care of themselves. I see people around me working themselves to death. So I would put that as the first step after the election before anything else we've named.
Say it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benita.
Thank you for this series of conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you,
to you all.
Well, thank you all for participating in Culture, Race, Myth, Art, and Justice. And these conversations will continue. What we will do is pull together more of what we've learned over this series and put forward some narrative, right? And some of the videotapes so that we can continue sharing with people the thoughts, the guidance, and the directions that the panelists like you have presented. Right. The issue, as I mentioned before, Rex Nedelford from Jamaica, Now Spirit, used to say we have to be short-term runners and long-term runners, which is what Juan said. Right. We have to look at the short term and we have to look at the long term. But we know that we're in this for a long haul. Transformation of a society and a nation is going to take time. But our people are here and we're not going anywhere.
So,
And we will be free.
Thank you all, Ashe, and we
Thank
will
you.
be free.
Ashe. It's been a
Ashe.
complete honor. Thank you so much.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Much
Thank
love,
you
much love.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you to our audience for